The morning air around the airport felt light and warm, the kind that makes a person feel excited even before anything special happens. The young girl walked beside her father with small but confident steps. She was holding onto her backpack straps, pulling them tight against her shoulders. As she looked around with bright curiosity, this was her first time flying to a new city for something important to her family. And even though the airport was noisy, she felt safe beside her father. He kept checking on her, giving her a small smile every time their eyes met. The terminal was busy, but the girl didn't mind. She watched people rolling luggage, rushing to their gates, talking on phones, checking screens, hugging relatives, and doing all the busy things people do when they travel. She liked watching faces, noticing how some people seemed nervous, while others looked excited or tired. It made her wonder where everyone was going and what stories they carried with them. Her father was calm, the kind of calm that made her feel grounded. He had a soft way of speaking even when he was in places that might make other people stressed. He checked their boarding passes again, though he already knew they were correct. He liked making sure things were done properly. When they reached the line for boarding, he gave her a pat on the shoulder and told her, "You go ahead. I'm right behind you." She nodded, feeling proud to step forward on her own. She joined the line with other passengers and waited patiently. The workers at the gate were making announcements, calling the group slowly and carefully. The girl held her boarding pass in her hand, ready for when it was her turn. After a few minutes, the boarding agent called her group. People around her began moving forward. She followed, quiet and polite, not pushing or rushing. She was excited but also trying to act mature, like the kind of traveler she saw in movies. When she reached the start of the ramp, she could already see the dim hallway that led to the plane. She felt her heartbeat fasten with excitement, just when she took her first step toward the ramp. A flight attendant walked in from the side. The woman stepped directly in front of the girl, blocking her path. The girl blinked and stopped instantly, thinking maybe the woman was turning or going somewhere else. But the flight attendant stayed planted in front of her, eyes narrowed slightly, not smiling. "Hold on," the woman said, her voice firm in a way that made the girl straighten her back. "Where do you think you're going?" The girl held out her boarding pass gently, thinking that was what the woman wanted. She tried to speak, but the words stuck for a moment, and she only managed a soft, "My." My group was called. The flight attendant didn't take the boarding pass right away. Instead, she looked the girl up and down like she was checking if something didn't add up. The girl felt a sudden tightness in her chest. She didn't understand what she had done wrong. People behind her in line began slowing down, trying to see what was happening. "No," the attendant said sharply, as if she already decided something without checking anything. "You're not supposed to be here. Step aside." The girl felt her cheeks warm. She didn't know where to step aside to because the line behind her was still moving. Her hand holding the boarding pass began to shake, and she lowered it slightly. She whispered, "But they called my group." The attendant sighed loudly, the kind of sigh people give when they think someone is causing trouble. She leaned closer, lowering her voice but not softening it. "You're not in this group. Don't try to slip in. Move back. Slip in." The words hit the girl harder than she expected. Her throat tightened, and she didn't know where to look. She wasn't trying to do anything wrong. She wasn't even sure she could look up at the woman without her eyes watering. Passengers in the line behind her traded looks. A man tilted his head and frowned. A woman further back whispered to someone standing next to her. The girl didn't hear what they said. She could feel their eyes. Her father had been only a few steps behind, letting her take the lead to make her feel grown. He saw the attendant's body language before he even heard a word. His calm expression changed instantly to confusion and then to concern. He walked faster, stepping around a couple of passengers who made space for him. When he reached his daughter, she looked up at him with wide, unsure eyes. She didn't say anything, but he could read the discomfort on her face clearly. He crouched just a little, lowering his voice. "Hey," he said gently. "What's going on here?" Before the girl could answer, the flight attendant spoke again, this time addressing him directly. "She's not in the right boarding group. She tried to go ahead. I'm asking her to move aside." Her father stayed calm, but there was a firmness beneath his calm that came out when he needed to protect his daughter. He looked at the boarding pass in her hand. It clearly showed the correct group, the exact one that had just been announced. He lifted his eyes back to the attendant. "Our group was called," he said politely. "We're in the right place." The flight attendant shook her head quickly, as if his explanation didn't matter. "Sir, I understand you want to get on the plane, but she wasn't supposed to go yet." The girl watched her father's face. He kept his voice soft, but she could tell he was troubled. He didn't want a scene. He never liked scenes, especially not ones where his daughter was being spoken to harshly in front of strangers. But he also wasn't the kind of person to simply nod when something wasn't right. Her group was called. He repeated, "We've been waiting patiently in line. Here are our passes." He offered them, but the attendant didn't take them right away. She crossed her arms, as if she had already decided her story made sense and nothing else needed to be checked. The girl felt smaller the longer this lasted. She wished she could disappear back into the flow of people. But the line had stopped moving. The air around them grew tense in the quiet. Way tension grows when people don't agree but haven't raised their voices yet. The girl's hands tightened on her pass. She tried not to look around, but she couldn't help seeing the puzzled faces of the passengers who were watching. Her father kept his tone steady. "Can you please check her boarding pass before assuming she's in the wrong place?" The attendant blinked, caught off guard by the calm but direct request. She finally reached out and grabbed the girl's pass. The girl watched her eyes move across the print, expecting the misunderstanding to clear immediately. But the attendant's expression didn't soften, even after she saw the correct information. Her father noticed that too. He stood a little straighter. "It says clearly right there," he said. "Group the same as everyone you just boarded." Passengers behind them murmured in agreement. One woman said quietly, "She's in the right group." "I'm in the same one," a man further back added. "Yes, this is our group." She didn't skip anything. But the attendant ignored the comments. She didn't make eye contact with anyone except the girl, and the look she gave her was still stern. "You still need to wait," she said, handing back the pass with a stiff movement. The girl took it back with shaking fingers. She didn't know how to defend herself. She didn't even understand why she was being treated differently. She felt her heart beating too fast. She wished she could hide behind her father completely. Her father breathed in slowly, the kind of slow breath that meant he was trying very hard to stay patient. He didn't want to raise his voice or cause trouble for anyone else on the flight, but he also wasn't willing to let his daughter stand there being corrected for something she didn't do. He opened his mouth to speak again, but before he could, something shifted in the crowd. A few people stepped slightly forward, not in an aggressive way, but in a way that showed they weren't afraid to stand near the situation. Another flight staff member at the gate glanced over. Noticing the stalled line and the worried expressions, the girl kept her eyes on the floor. She could hear her father's steady voice next to her and the soft murmurs behind her. She didn't know how this moment would end, but she hoped someone would simply listen. She hoped someone would notice she hadn't done anything wrong. The ramp waited just a few steps ahead. The plane waited beyond that. Her seat, the one she'd looked forward to since morning, waited too. But she couldn't take even one more step until someone decided she was allowed to move again, and she stood there, quiet, holding her boarding pass, hoping that the truth would finally be seen. The girl stood still, holding her boarding pass like it was the only thing keeping her steady. Her father moved a little closer, enough so she felt the edge of his sleeve touch her arm. It was his silent way of telling her she wasn't alone. He didn't raise his voice or step forward aggressively. He simply positioned himself beside her, making it clear he would handle things now. He looked at the flight attendant again, his expression calm but firm. "You've seen her boarding pass," he said in a steady voice. "We're in the right group. We followed the announcements just like everyone else." The flight attendant didn't seem moved by his calmness. If anything, she seemed bothered by it, like she expected him to react differently. She crossed her arms again. "Sir, I told you she needs to wait. You can wait too." The girl saw something shift in the people around her. A few passengers frowned openly now. Someone sighed behind them, clearly frustrated, not at the girl or her father, but at the way the situation was being handled. The line had stopped moving almost completely. Her father kept his voice low. the same gentle tone he used when he tried to explain something to her without scaring her. "We've been respectful," he said. "All I'm asking is that you treat her fairly." The attendant pressed her lips tightly, almost like she didn't want to admit she might have acted too quickly. She didn't respond, but her expression stayed hard. The girl felt her eyes drift to her father's hand. He didn't grab her or pull her close, but his fingers extended slightly, small gesture showing he was ready to take her hand if she needed him to. She didn't reach out, but knowing he was there made it a little easier to breathe. Passengers around them began whispering louder. A young man a few rows behind leaned slightly to one side to see better. An older woman shook her head and mumbled something under her breath. The tension wasn't loud or chaotic, but it was growing. Filling the space between everyone in the boarding area, a gate worker standing near the podium finally turned his head, noticing the jam forming at the ramp entrance. He blinked twice, trying to understand what caused such a sudden stop. Then he stepped away from the podium and walked toward the small cluster of people. The father noticed him coming and gave a gentle nod. The girl didn't turn fully, but she could see the worker from the corner of her eye. His expression looked more confused than anything else. "What seems to be the problem here?" the gate worker asked. Before the father could answer, the flight attendant responded first. "I've explained to them. They tried to board before their group." The father didn't interrupt, even though the words were not true. He waited until the gate worker turned to him, then he spoke quietly. "Our group was called. We were waiting in line with everyone else. She was ahead of me because I wanted her to feel confident traveling." The gate worker looked at the girl and at her boarding pass in her trembling hand. "May I see it?" he asked gently. She nodded and handed it to him. He checked it for only a second before lifting his eyes in surprise. "This is the right group," he said. "You were supposed to board already." The flight attendant stiffened. I thought the gate worker didn't let her finish. He didn't scold her, but his tone became more careful. "We're trying to keep things moving. We shouldn't stop passengers who are doing everything correctly." Few people on the line murmured in agreement. The girl felt her father glance at her, checking if she was all right. She nodded softly, though her chest still felt tight. The flight attendant didn't step aside. She kept standing there as if she wasn't ready to admit she had reacted too fast. Her eyes went back to the girl, and even though she didn't say anything else directly to her, the girl felt that same sharpness in her gaze. The father noticed it too. He didn't say anything for a moment. He took another slow breath. Then he turned to the gate worker. "Is there a supervisor available?" he asked politely. The flight attendant reacted instantly. "There's no need for that," but the gate worker raised his hand slightly, motioning her to pause. "I can call one," he said. "Let me radio them." The girl watched the man take out a small device from his belt and speak into it quietly. Her heart beat faster, not because she wanted trouble, but because she felt the weight of what had just happened. She didn't understand why she had been stopped, why she had been spoken to like she was doing something wrong, and she didn't understand why the attendant seemed so determined not to admit a simple mistake. Passengers around them continued to wait. No one looked annoyed at the girl or her father. If anything, they looked sympathetic. Some offered small smiles. One older man gave the girl a gentle nod, the kind adults give when they want a child to know they're not at fault. A moment later, a senior crew member stepped up from the podium area. She was wearing a slightly different uniform that showed she held more authority. Her steps were quick, but controlled. The kind of walk someone practices when they're used to solving problems calmly. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice steady but concerned. The gate worker explained in simple terms. She stopped this family from boarding, even though they're in the correct group. The passengers behind them noticed too. The senior crew member turned to the father. "Sir, I'm very sorry this happened. Let me take a look myself." He handed over both boarding passes without hesitation. The girl watched the woman read them with a careful, neutral expression. Then she nodded firmly. "These are correct," she said. "You should have been boarded already." The father gave a small nod. "Thank you." The senior crew member then turned her attention to the flight attendant. The tone wasn't angry, but it was precise. "Why were they stopped?" The flight attendant's eyes moved slightly. "I thought she wasn't in the right group." She walked ahead too quickly. She walked with the group that was called. The senior crew member replied. We can't stop passengers unless we have clear information, and even then, we handle it politely. The attendant opened her mouth slightly, but no clear explanation came out. The senior crew member didn't push the matter. She simply stepped in front of the girl and her father and made a welcoming gesture. Please, come with me. You can board now? For a second, the girl hesitated. She still felt the residue of the embarrassment lingering in her chest. But then her father's hand gently touched her shoulder, guiding her forward. They walked past the attendant, who stepped aside but still looked tense. The girl kept her eyes down, not wanting to meet the woman's gaze again. But she didn't feel alone. Her father stayed at her side, and the senior crew member walked a little ahead, making sure the path was clear. As they reached the beginning of the ramp, the girl felt something shift inside her. She was still shaken, but she wasn't frozen anymore. Her father leaned toward her and said softly, You did nothing wrong. Remember that. She nodded, her throat tightening slightly at the kindness in his voice. She didn't trust her voice to answer, so she just walked forward. Focusing on the faint hum of the airplane somewhere down the ramp, passengers behind them waited as the senior crew member held out a hand to let the family go first. No one complained about the delay. If anything, many of them looked relieved that someone had finally stepped in. As the girl stepped onto the ramp, the cool air from the jet bridge brushed across her face. It felt different from the warm air of the terminal. It felt calming. She let out a slow breath she didn't even realize she'd been holding. Her father walked beside her, steps steady and protective. He looked down at her gently. Once we're seated, take a moment to breathe. You're okay. She nodded again. She wasn't okay yet, but she trusted she would be. But behind them, the senior crew member remained with the gate worker, speaking in low voices. Passengers nearby caught a few words like report, incident, and review. The atmosphere around the boarding area had changed completely. In just a few minutes, the girl didn't see any of this as she continued walking. She only knew that something felt unfinished, like a story that had taken a sudden turn and had more to reveal. She didn't know what the airline would decide or how the people who saw everything would react. She only knew that this moment wasn't over yet, and her father, though calm on the outside, felt the same. He knew that what had happened wasn't something to brush aside, not when it had left his daughter shaken in a place that was supposed to be safe, not when it had happened so quickly, without reason. He didn't want revenge. He didn't want drama, but he wanted fairness. And he had a feeling the airline had just stepped into a situation they wouldn't forget so quickly. The ramp stretched ahead of them, leading to the plane and a small break from the tension. But the storm that had started behind them was still gathering strength, if none of them fully knew it yet. The girl stepped onto the plane with slow, careful steps, almost like she was afraid the floor might vanish beneath her feet. The air inside the cabin was cooler than the terminal, and filled with that familiar airplane scent, clean, little metallic, and strangely comforting. She held her backpack close to her chest as she walked down the aisle beside her father. A flight attendant on board greeted them with a warm smile, aware of what had happened outside. "Welcome aboard," she said kindly. Her tone was gentle, the kind that made strangers feel comfortable. The girl felt a small wave of relief wash over her just hearing it. They found their seats to spots near the middle of the plane. The girl slipped into the window seat while her father placed their small bag in the overhead bin. She leaned her head against the cool wall next to the window and let out a slow breath. Her legs still felt shaky from earlier. Her father sat down beside her and reached over to adjust her seatbelt. "Are you okay?" he asked, keeping his voice soft. She nodded a little, though she wasn't sure the answer was fully true. "I just didn't understand why she stopped me." Her father looked at her with gentle eyes. "Sometimes people make quick judgments. When they do, it's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong." She nodded again, but the memory of the flight attendant's harsh stare still lingered in her mind. She looked out the window to distract herself. The jet bridge was still attached to the plane, but she could see a sliver of the runway beyond it. She liked looking at the runway. It reminded her that soon they would be in the air. Leaving this moment behind, More passengers began filing in. Many of them walked past the row slowly, carrying bags or coats or phones. Some of them glanced at her and her father with small, knowing looks. They had seen what happened. She could feel it. An older woman walking past even paused for a second and whispered, "You handled that so well, sweetheart." Then she continued to her seat without waiting for a reply. The girl blinked in surprise. She didn't think she had handled anything well. She thought she had looked frightened and frozen. But the woman's kindness warmed her chest slightly. Her father noticed her expression. "See," he murmured. "People know the truth." She gave a tiny smile, the first one since boarding. But the cabin wasn't calm for long. A quiet stir began at the front of the plane, soft at first, then growing. Passengers sitting closer to the door turned their heads. A low conversation started between two crew members near the entryway. Their voices were too soft to hear clearly, but their expressions looked serious. The girl straightened a little. "What's happening?" she whispered. Her father looked forward, trying to make sense of the movement. "Not sure," he said. But he watched carefully. A moment later, the senior crew member from the gate stepped onto the plane. She wasn't smiling this time. She looked focused. The way people look when they're trying to fix a problem quickly before it becomes bigger. She spoke quietly to the onboard crew. Their faces shifted, some surprised, some troubled. None of them looked angry, but they all looked like they were being told something important. The girl watched in silence. She didn't want trouble. She didn't want anyone to get in trouble. She just wanted to fly and forget what happened. But she also sensed that the situation behind them wasn't finished. She saw the crew glance toward her and her father briefly, not in a rude way, but in a way that said they understood something involved them. The girl felt her stomach flutter again. Her father placed a calming hand on her arm. "Just breathe," he whispered. A few seats ahead, a man leaned over to another passenger. "Something's going on," he murmured. Another replied softly, "Probably about what happened at the gate." People didn't look irritated. If anything, they looked curious and sympathetic. They had waited this long already. They seemed willing to wait more if it meant making things right. The girl watched the aisle with careful eyes. After a minute, the senior crew member stepped out of view, heading back off the plane. The door remained open. The jet bridge stayed connected. No one gave the safety announcement. No one moved to close the overhead bins. Nothing about the plane felt close to taking off. Her father sighed quietly, but not in frustration. More like he suspected what would happen next. The girl finally asked, "Are we?" "Not leaving." "We will," he said. "But they're sorting something out first." She looked down at her hands. She didn't want anyone punished. She just wanted fairness. But adults handled things differently from kids. She didn't know what the airline was thinking or planning after several minutes of stillness. The senior crew member returned to the plane with two additional people, one of them wearing a badge around his neck, likely a supervisor from the airline, and the other holding a small tablet used for logging incidents or reports. The supervisor walked a few steps into the cabin and scanned the passengers, almost as if searching for someone. Then his gaze landed on the girl and her father. He approached slowly, not wanting to alarm them. Her father sat up straight, ready to speak if needed. The supervisor stopped beside their row and bent his knees slightly, so he was at their height. His expression was calm, respectful. "Sir," he said quietly, "may I speak with you for a moment?" The girl's heart tightened. Her father looked at her first, silently checking if she was okay. She gave the smallest nod, though her eyes stayed wide. He turned to the supervisor. "Sure." The supervisor lowered his voice so the conversation wouldn't disturb everyone. "I want to apologize personally for what happened at the gate. It should not have occurred. Our staff is trained to follow procedure respectfully, and I'm sorry that wasn't your experience today." The father nodded once. "Thank you. I appreciate that," the supervisor continued. "We are handling the issue and making sure the team understands what went wrong. I promise you that steps will be taken." The girl looked at his face. He seemed sincere, not like someone saying words just to move forward. Her father remained calm. "I want to be clear, we're not here to cause trouble or make a scene. I only asked for fairness because my daughter didn't deserve to be singled out like that. I completely understand, the supervisor said. And you handled it with patience. We're grateful for that. Passengers nearby listened quietly, pretending not to stare but clearly absorbing every word. Some nodded approvingly. The supervisor straightened a bit. We would also like to offer something as an apology. It won't erase the moment, but we hope it shows we're taking this seriously. The girl tilted her head. She didn't need anything. She didn't want anything. She only wanted to feel normal again. Her father paused before responding. Thank you, but we're not looking for compensation. I only want assurance that no child feels singled out like that again. The supervisor nodded respectfully. Absolutely. We will document everything from today. Then he glanced gently at the girl. His voice softened. You were very brave. The girl's eyes dropped to her lap. She didn't feel brave. She felt small. But hearing that soothed a part of her that had been hurting since the moment she was stopped on the ramp, the supervisor gave a polite nod, stepped away to speak with the crew again. The person holding the tablet followed him, tapping notes quickly. After they left, the plane grew quiet again. The onboard attendants resumed their positions, though their eyes lingered on the girl and her father every now and then, as if checking they were all right. Finally, after several more minutes, the senior crew member returned again, this time offering a reassuring smile. We're ready to close the door, she announced softly. The mood in the cabin shifted back to normal. People adjusted their seat belts, placed their phones on airplane mode, and settled in. The girl leaned back in her seat as the plane door clicked shut. She let out a deep breath, like she had been holding it for far too long. Her father turned to her again. You okay? She hesitated. Then she whispered, I think so. He nodded. You did nothing wrong. She looked out the window again. The jet bridge slowly pulled away from the plane. The ground crew waved and signaled. The plane began to back up as the engines rumbled to life. The girl felt a strange mix inside her relief, sadness, leftover fear, and a quiet sense of strength she hadn't known she had. She didn't want to think about the moment on the ramp anymore, but she knew she wouldn't forget it, and even though the plane was finally taking off, she sensed that the story wasn't done. Not for her, not for her father, and definitely not for the airline. Because moments like this didn't simply disappear. Into the sky, they followed you quietly. But surely, they waited for the right time to be acknowledged, and the consequences of what happened on that ramp were only just beginning to unfold. The girl stayed seated while the plane continued to sit at the gate, but her hands wouldn't stay still. She kept rubbing her palms together, then pressing them flat against her knees, then gripping the straps of her backpack again. Her father noticed, though she didn't say anything. He leaned a little closer and whispered, You're okay. I'm right here. His voice was soft, not to draw attention, but strong enough that she could hold on to the comfort in it. But across the cabin, the flight attendant from the ramp, the same one who had blocked her, was now standing near the front galley with her arms folded. She looked restless, like she couldn't sit with the fact that someone had questioned her earlier. Every so often, she glanced toward the girl's row with a tight expression, almost like she was waiting for something. The girl avoided looking back. She focused on her hands instead, breathing slowly through her nose, trying to calm the small tremble in her fingers. Around them, passengers were getting settled, placing bags overhead, fastening seatbelts, adjusting air vents. A soft murmur filled the cabana mix of conversation, shuffling fabric, and the distant whine of the engines warming up. It should have been normal. It should have been the moment where the girl leaned back and relaxed, knowing the worst part of the morning was already behind her. But somewhere inside, the weight of the ramp incident still clung to her chest. Her father noticed her silence and placed a hand gently over hers. You did nothing wrong, he whispered again. Remember that. She nodded, though the words still had trouble sinking in. A new sound broke through the cabin, footsteps approaching. The girl didn't want to look up, but she felt the shift in the air before she even raised her eyes. When she finally did, she saw the same flight attendant from the ramp standing directly beside their row, her expression tight and controlled. I need to verify something, the woman said. Her tone flat. The girl's heart dropped. For a moment she thought she had done something wrong, even though she had been sitting quietly the whole time. Her father sat up straighter. Verify what? He asked calmly. The flight attendant held out a hand as if expecting something. Her boarding status. There seems to be a problem with her pre-boarding authorization. The girl blinked, confused. She hadn't pre-boarded. She hadn't even attempted to. She had simply walked onto the plane like everyone else. Her father took a breath, letting silence stretch for a second before responding. There is no problem with her boarding, he said. Everything was handled correctly. The attendant's expression hardened. Sir, I'm doing my job. I'm protecting my child, he replied. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't lean forward or gesture harshly. His calmness was steady, the kind that made people listen whether they wanted to or not. Another attendant, the warm smiling one who had greeted them earlier, noticed the tension and hurried over. Is everything all right? She asked, looking between the girl, her father, and the stern woman. There's a boarding issue. The stern woman answered quickly. There's no issue. The father said again. The second attendant glanced at the girl. At her quiet posture, at the way she held her backpack like a small shield. Something about the scene made her eyebrows pinch with concern. Let me check the system, she said gently. The stern attendant stepped back, clearly annoyed. The warm attendant took the father's boarding pass folder and looked through it with careful eyes. She glanced at the system on her handheld device, tapped a few times, then looked up with a puzzled frown. There's no issue, she announced. Everything is valid. She's properly listed and cleared. The girl felt a small breath of relief slip out of her chest. She didn't realize she'd been holding it until that moment. The stern attendant tried to maintain her stance, but something in her face shifted an uncomfortable flicker like she wasn't expecting to be contradicted. Are you sure you checked correctly? She asked, her tone colder now. The second attendant nodded firmly. Yes, the records are clean. Father met the stern woman's eyes. If you have a concern, he said evenly, I'd like to hear what it is. A real concern, not something that keeps changing. The woman's jaw tightened. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, but no words came. Instead, she turned sharply and walked back toward the front of the plane. The girl watched her go, still feeling the leftover tension in her chest. She wasn't used to being in situations where adults argued around her. She wished the entire morning could be erased. But she also felt strangely proud of her father. The way he stood up for her without ever losing control. The warm attendant crouched slightly, so she was level with the girl. You're absolutely fine, she said in a gentle tone. You're supposed to be here. If you need anything, you can press the button above your seat. I'm right here. The girl gave a small nod, grateful for the kindness. When the attendant walked away, the girl looked at her father. Did I make her mad? She asked softly. Her father shook his head. You didn't make anyone mad. Some people don't like being corrected, but that's not on you. She tried to accept that answer, but a piece of her still felt responsible. The feeling lingered like a shadow. Even as the plane doors finally closed and the crew prepared for takeoff, the captain's voice came over the speakers next. Warm and steady. Good morning, everyone. We'll be pushing back shortly. Please remain seated and make sure your seatbelts are fastened. The girl expected things to calm down. But as the crew began their safety demonstration, she noticed the stern attendant still glancing back at her row, each time with a deeper frown. She didn't understand what the woman wanted. She didn't understand why simply walking onto an airplane seemed to bother her so much. Her father noticed the stares too. He didn't comment on them, but his eyes followed every glance with the quiet alertness of someone who wasn't going to let another moment slip by unnoticed. The engines grew louder. The plane slowly backed away from the gate, and the cabin lights dimmed slightly. The girl tried to hold on to the excitement she had felt earlier that morning, the excitement of flying, traveling somewhere new. She tried to replace the uncomfortable moments with thoughts of the city waiting for them, the kind things she hoped to see, the warm memories she wanted to make. But the truth was simple. The atmosphere on the plane had changed. It wasn't just her. Other passengers had noticed the earlier exchange. Some had seen the tension on the ramp. Others picked up on the quiet conflict in the cabin. A few whispered softly to each other, glancing between the attendants. The mood, once calm and routine, held a faint buzz of uncertainty. As the plane began to taxi, the warm attendant passed by one more time. She rested a gentle hand on the girl's arm, brief, respectful, reassuring. "You're brave," she whispered. "Don't forget that." The girl's heart softened at those words. She didn't feel brave, but hearing someone say it made her want to believe it. Her father leaned slightly toward her. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "I think so." He smiled softly. "Good. We'll get through this." But even as they spoke, a small announcement from the intercom cut through the cabin. Spoken by a crew member, but clearly influenced by someone else. "We need to remain at the stop position for a moment while we resolve an internal crew matter. Please stay seated." The girl's stomach nodded. She knew somehow, without anyone saying it, that the internal crew matter had something to do with her. Her father looked calm, but the little furrow in his brow revealed he was paying very close attention. Minutes passed. Quiet ones. Heavy ones. Then the warm attendant returned with a slow, "Careful expression, sir," she whispered. "The captain wants to speak with you both." The girl's heart froze. Her father stood, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "Lead the way." They followed the attendant toward the front of the plane, the aisle suddenly feeling much longer than before. Passengers watched with curious eyes, sensing tension but not understanding it fully. When they reached the front galley, the captain was waiting, and the moment the girl saw his expression steady, serious, but not unkind, she understood something important. Whatever happened next would change everything about this flight, and the airline wasn't ready for. What her father was about to say, the girl stood close to her father as they reached the front of the plane. The captain waited there with a calm but serious expression, his hands lightly folded in front of him. The warm attendant stood nearby, as if ready to support them in whatever came next. The atmosphere around the front galley felt heavier than the rest of the cabin,
Alice.
like everyone was holding their breath. The captain lowered his voice before speaking. "Sir, I want to make sure everything is clear before we continue our flight. I've been informed that there was a situation on the ramp, and again inside the cabin. I want to hear your side directly." The girl looked up at her father, unsure what he would say. She could see the slight rise and fall of his chest, like he was preparing himself. He wasn't angry the way some people get angry, loud and sharp. His calmness was deeper, controlled, the type that made people listen without question. He nodded once. "Thank you for asking," he said. "My daughter tried to walk up the ramp, and your crew member blocked her. There was no explanation, no request for a different line, no safety concerns stated. She simply refused to let her pass." He paused for a moment. "Then inside the cabin, the same crew member came to our row and claimed there was a boarding problem. There wasn't. Another attendant checked it and confirmed it." The captain listened without interrupting, his face steady. "I see," he said slowly. "And you felt the behavior was targeted toward your daughter?" "I didn't feel it," the father replied. "I saw it. My daughter was the only child held back. Everyone else walked past without a question. She was the only one who was stopped, questioned, and then challenged again after boarding. This isn't a misunderstanding. It's a pattern." The girl watched the captain's expression shift not to anger, but to something thoughtful, something concerned. He nodded again. "Thank you for being honest," he said. The warm attendant stepped forward. "Captain, I can confirm what he said. There was no issue with their documents, and I did see tension from the start." The captain took a moment before speaking again. "Where is the crew member now?" "In the front galley," the warm attendant said quietly. "Bring her here, please." The girl felt her heartbeat quicken. She wasn't sure she wanted to see the woman again, but she also knew this moment mattered. A minute later, the stern attendant walked back toward them. Her face was tight. The kind of expression a person wears when they're already bracing for someone to disagree. The captain kept his tone professional. "I want to understand what happened on the ramp." "I was enforcing procedure," she said quickly. "The child tried to board early." "That's not true," the father replied calmly. We walked with everyone else. The captain raised a hand gently, not to silence anyone, but to slow the tension. Let's stay focused. I reviewed the camera at the gate. They were walking with the normal boarding group. For the first time, the stern attendant's confidence faltered. Her eyes dropped for just a second. And inside the cabin, the captain continued, "Why did you claim there was a boarding issue?" "There might have been an error with the system," she said. "There was no error," the warm attendant added softly. "Everything scanned correctly." Quiet pause settled over the small group. The passengers nearby weren't close enough to hear every word. But they clearly sensed something serious happening. The captain took a slow breath. "This flight cannot continue with a crew conflict involving a passenger, especially a child. And it cannot continue with a crew member who has created tension that affects safety, comfort, or trust." The stern attendant stiffened. "Are you saying I am relieving you of duty for this flight?" Captain said plainly. The girl felt the shock ripple through the air. The stern woman blinked, stunned. "You're removing me?" "Yes," the captain replied. "Please gather your things and step off the aircraft. A supervisor will meet you at the gate." "Ah!" The woman looked speechless for the first time. She nodded stiffly, then walked away without a word. The girl let out a breath she didn't even realize she'd been holding. The warm attendant gave her a gentle smile. The captain turned back to them. "I apologize for what you experienced today," he said. "This is not what we stand for. Your daughter deserves to feel safe and respected." The girl's father nodded. "Thank you for handling it. We're going to take a few minutes to finalize paperwork," the captain added. "You can wait in the front seats until we finish." The warm attendant guided them to 2 empty seats near the front. The girl sat down slowly, her heart still trying to catch up with everything that had happened. Her father placed an arm around her shoulder and pulled her into a gentle side hug. "You okay?" he asked softly. She nodded. "Yes, you did nothing wrong," he reminded her again. "None of this was your fault." This time she believed him. After a few minutes, the captain made a short announcement to the passengers, keeping his explanation simple. "We had a crew issue that needed to be resolved," he said. "Thank you for your patience." His voice was steady, reassuring. The plane finally pushed back from the gate much later than scheduled. But now the cabin felt lighter, as if the troubling air had been lifted away. People settled again, conversations picked up, and the engines rumbled through the cabin. The warm attendant came by with cups of water. She placed one carefully in front of the girl. "For you," she said with a smile, "because today took a lot of courage." The girl felt her cheeks warm slightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're very brave," the attendant said. "Braver than most adults I've met." When the plane lifted off the ground, the girl felt something she hadn't felt all morning, a quiet pride. She wasn't proud of the conflict, or the fear, or the uncomfortable moments. She was proud because she had stayed calm, stayed respectful, stayed herself, even when someone tried to make her feel small. Mid-flight, her father leaned his head closer. "You know," he said softly, "sometimes life puts us in hard situations to show us our own strength. You handled this better than many grown-ups." She gave a small smile. "I was scared." "Being scared doesn't mean you're not strong," he replied. The girl watched the clouds through the window. They looked soft and endless, floating beneath the wings like a white sea. For the first time that day, she let her shoulders relax. She even rested her head lightly against her father's arm. When the plane landed hours later, something unexpected happened. As the passengers stood to leave, several of them paused near their row. A woman said, "Your daughter handled that with so much grace." A man added, "I'm glad the captain stepped in." That wasn't right. The girl looked up, surprised. She didn't know people had been watching, but they had, and they saw her. The warm attendant waited at the front door as everyone left the plane. When the girl reached her, she knelt just a bit so they were eye level. "You're going to do big things one day," she said with a gentle smile. "I can feel it." The girl didn't know how to respond. She just smiled back, a warm, real smile that came all the way from her heart. Her father thanked the crew and guided her out the door. As they stepped into the bright light of the airport corridor, the girl felt lighter, different. Somehow. Not because someone had been removed from the plane, not because people had noticed her, But because she knew she hadn't let someone else's actions define her, she held her father's hand. A little more confidently as they walked toward baggage claim. The morning had been difficult and confusing and heavy, but it had also shown her something important. No matter how someone treated her, she still had her voice, her dignity, and her strength, and sometimes that was enough to change everything.